So I have here open three volumes of Sfas Emes because we're going to try to weave together a few pieces, as much as time allows, of what we have here, starting with Parshas Behar-Bechukosai. Now, the Sfas Emes, again, the way the Sefer works is that these are drushes he said on Shabbos and Yom Tov over the years. It's listed by year. And many years he would start off with the same medrash, explaining it in a different way each time. So one medrash that he addresses a lot in Parshas Behar-Bechukosai is the following. It says in Vayikra Rabbah, it says, Chishavti derachai. This is a pasuk from Tillim. David HaMelech said, I planned out my ways, v'ashiva raglai el eidosecha, and I brought my feet back to your laws. So Chazal say, what does that mean? David HaMelech says, in the morning I get up and I think I'm going to go to this place, or to see this person, or to do this thing. My feet would bring me to shuls and batei medrash. So it's very hard to understand that literally, because David HaMelech was a responsible person, and he was a king, and he was the head of the army and the head of the finances. And if there's a meeting, and suddenly they're looking for, where are you, and you're in shul. So as much as a person wants to learn and such, it's not supposed to be pogea and the bein adam lachavero and other people. So the Sfas Emes explains it in many different ways, in a way that's not a literal translation of it, but what it really means. Now, Chazal said this on the words Im Bechukosai telechu, the beginning of the second parsha, the parsha we have this week. Now, what's tricky about that is chukim are laws, and it says that you walk in those laws. Okay, walking implies, like we know the idea of keeping laws, lishmor, or lakayim in terms of positive ones. What is to walk in laws? So here he says like this. Chazal say, Rashi brings down, Im Bechukosai telecha shetu amelim baTorah, that you will toil in Torah. Now, if that means to learn Torah with all your strength, it could say that. We have the words that are needed for that. We have the words for learning. So he says like this. What does it mean, amelim baTorah, in this context? It says, Pirush, amelim limtzo b'chol davar or haTorah. Working hard to find in everything in this world the light of Torah. Because we say, Rashi brings this down in the first pasuk in Bereshis, that the word Bereshis from Chazal is a compound word. Bereshis means Bishvil HaTorah Shenikres Reshis. The world was created for the Torah that was called Reshis, and Bishvil Yisrael, for Am Yisrael, that are called Reshis. So what that means is that everything in the world has Torah in its DNA. If you were able to look, right, I heard what Moshe Shapiro said, that's how Avraham Avinu discovered what he discovered. He was able to unpack it from the world. It was there. Eov uses this pasuk, Mibsariach ze Eloka. I was able to look at my own flesh and to see Hashem. Now let's not make the following mistake. Sometimes people right away want to jump, and they say, good, so that means everything I study in university is Torah. Physics is Torah, chemistry is Torah, history is Torah, everything's Torah. Good evening, Barry. That all these things are Torah. They're Chachma, okay, but not the same as Torah. Let's explain. The Maral speaks about the idea of what Greek Chachma was, Greek wisdom. Chazal would call that Chachma Chitzonis, external wisdom, meaning it's wisdom but it's external, whereas the Torah represents Chachma Pnimis, the internal Torah. The wisdom that the Greeks see is the world that was created by the Asara Ma'amoros, the 10 utterances that Hashem did in Bereshis to create the universe. So really, when we look at nature, when we look at science, we are seeing Ratzon Hashem, the will of Hashem, playing out. When we see gravity happening, when we see everything going on in the natural world, we are seeing the wisdom of Hashem, we're seeing the Ratzon of Hashem. And that's 100% true. But it's called external because the world's purpose doesn't stop there, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a wonderful world. The world's purpose is internal, meaning within the context of that wonderful world, there's the Torah. And there's Am Yisrael who have to follow the Torah to bring the world to its destiny. That's called the Chachma Pnimis, Rav Hutner says, because that depends on our choices. right? The idea of gravity doesn't depend on whether I choose to follow gravity or not follow gravity. What goes up must come down. And it's there. But in terms of Torah, if it says, lo signo, don't steal, either I follow it or I don't. That's the internal workings of the universe. So deep inside that wonderful universe which expresses the Ratzon Hashem and the wisdom of Hashem, there's Torah, which is called Reshis, meaning it's there at the beginning of all. So that's why it also says, Hashem b'chachma yosad aretz, a pasuk in Mishlei, that Hashem created or founded the world, established the world, either for or with wisdom. Sheyesh b'chol davar chelik b'Torah. Everything in the world has a portion in the Torah, or a portion of the Torah in it. Okay, so this is, therefore, he says, Chazal tells in Pirkei Avos, Al tihi maflig l'chol davar. Don't ever, reject or cast off anything in the world. Don't say, this thing is useless. What's it here for? He says, meaning, la'afrisho mishosho b'Torah. Don't look at anything in the world and say this has nothing to do with Torah. Everything in the world has to do with Torah. Everything in the world has Torah in its very DNA. And this is what it means when Chazal said, they finish in that Mishnah, she'ein l'cha davar she'ein lo makom. There's no thing in the world that doesn't have its place. What does that mean, its place? He says, in the Torah. Its place in the Torah. Everything in the world in this, it's the most complex computer program ever created. Everything that's happening in the world constantly is expressing or has the potential to express Torah. So let's take a look at this now from someplace else a little bit. In Shavuos, the first piece that the Sfas Emes says on Shavuos refers to a pasuk in Tehillim that's brought in the Gemara in Shabbos. Eretz Yora v'Shakota. Okay, the pasuk there says that the earth was fearful, and was quiet. So the Gemara asks, Im Yora lama Shakota. If it was fearful, what made it quiet down? Shakota, if it was at peace, why was it afraid? Ela bitchila Yora b'sof Shakota. First, it was afraid, and then it was at peace. What are we talking about? The statement of Rish Lakish. T'nai hisna HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Ma'aseh Bereshis. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a condition with the universe when he created it. And Chazal darshan this on the word Yom HaShishi. In Bereshis, all the days that come at the end of the day, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi, Yom HaShishi. What's that Ha doing? Chazal say it's referring to a very special Shishi. Not the sixth day of the week, but the sixth day of Sivan, when Am Yisrael had to receive the Torah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu put this fail-safe into the universe. If Am Yisrael receive the Torah, the universe will be established and continue. If not, it will disappear. It will return back to that state of tohu vavohu, of nothingness before it came. So, why? Why all this? So the Sfas Emes explains, Sha'al yidei hayira shakta lebasof, that peace that came to the world was only be able to be achieved because of the yira in the beginning. Why? He says, what's going on with the question?
He's saying that the earth itself had yira.
Yeah. The very universe itself had yira. In other words, its existence was tenuous.
Really?
Right. Why we say the inanimate has fear?
Yeah.
So even inanimate objects, V'lachim tells, has a whole piece in the Shir Das, that they're different, everything exists on different levels. So there is a spiritual reality even to a rock, even to a tree. And it has its desire to fulfill its purpose, to survive. Like we see with Yaakov Avinu, it said the rocks said, Alai yoniach tzadik es rosho. So here, this idea of fear means everything in existence fears when its existence is in danger. So the universe's existence was tenuous, right? I mean, if I was the universe and I had to rely on Jews making the right decisions to continue existing, I'd be pretty worried also. It's there,
It could be like a volcano.
Correct. That it's simmering there and you can never tell when it's going to erupt. So he says like this, the fear brought the sheket. Because if there hadn't been a need for this condition, right, in Maisa Bereshis, that it would only continue to exist if the Torah was accepted, it says this prepared the world for Torah. Meaning, let's look at this in terms of description of what's natural. Sometimes people will say, Judaism isn't natural, right? If it was natural, so a pig tastes good, you would eat a pig, right? It's natural, right, for people to mate with whoever they want or something like that. That's natural. Judaism goes against nature. He says no, because true nature means that which gives me my terms of existence, right? That's the very idea of a makom. The Maharal says the word makom comes from kiyum, that which gives me my terms of existence. The makom of a fish is in the water, because that gives it its terms of existence. By setting up that condition in the universe, that means that the makom of the universe is Torah. Because Torah gives the world its terms of existence. And it's as natural as the fact that I breathe oxygen. Because without oxygen, I don't exist. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu built the world in that way that the existence of the world is dependent on Torah. And then he says a person can truly accept Torah and the world itself can accept Torah. Okay, so he says this enables a person to be able to fulfill the mitzvah with more ava and more simcha because of the understanding that the world is in sync with Torah, not just in sync, but that's the true nature of everything in the world. So tying together these two pieces, he says, Im Bechukosai telecha shetua amelim baTorah. That means you have to work in this world in the way to let everything find its place in the framework of Torah. Meaning what we are doing is we're guiding the world with every decision we make in its progress according to Torah. And we're supposed to do this with every encounter we have, everything we do. That's why it says, Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zakas Yisrael, Fikoch Hirbalem Torah mitzvahs. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give merit to Am Yisrael, so he gave them lots of Torah mitzvahs. Sometimes we say, wouldn't we get a better score if we were just a few, right? Why so many? Because that means that Torah is in every aspect of our existence. The way we do our farming, the way we do our business, the way our married life is, the way everything, the way we deal with our neighbors, the way we deal with our health. Torah is there in everything. And that is the most natural thing which is there for the world and for a Jew. It doesn't look like that on the outside. It looks like the Torah is a stranger in a strange land in the world. But it says deep in the world, that's the true nature of the world. Shetu amelim baTorah means as you are working with the eyeglasses of Torah and everything you do, viewing every encounter as an opportunity to bring Hashem's Torah in the world, so then you bring the world to its true, natural, healthy state. That's the way it should be.
Is it the world or is it the universe?
The universe, right, correct. When we use the word world, right, it's really the universe which goes even beyond the extent of the Hubble telescope, which maybe physically goes a lot, but there are worlds upon worlds upon worlds, Chazal say. Right, that there are parallel spiritual worlds, one higher than the other, one higher than the other. An example that Reb Bloch brings in this piece about the different levels, he says there's a medrash that a frog came over to David HaMelech and said, I say better Shira, I sing better to Hashem than you do. So he says people that understand the Agaritas of Chazal know when something is just a parable and know when they're saying this is a reality. He says, a person looks at a frog, how can that be? The ribbit doesn't sound like Tillim to us. But he says, the frog that you see, we're seeing it in its very limited physical existence. But on a higher world, it has an existence in which it can sing to Hashem. Okay? And all of us as well. We, for example, this explains really why we move the world when we do our mitzvahs, a physical mitzvah. I put on tefillin. I change the world. How do I change the world? Because parallel to my physical self here putting on the physical tefillin is me as I exist in these higher worlds and the tefillin as they exist in the higher worlds and the effect that they have there, which then bubbles down back here as well. It's a tricky concept. I remember when I was in Shidduchim, I tried explaining it to a young lady one night. They didn't go so well. It was very clear. Anyways, but, when you take time to really think it through, so you see that. Okay, so this is the idea of the Omo B'Torah. Now, This idea of Omo Batorah is also referred to in a pasuk, right, in Koheles, which says, "My Yisron la'odam b'chol amolo sheyamol tachas hashemesh." What advantage is there in a person for all of the toiling that he toils under the sun? Right. So Chazal had many questions they had to resolve with Sefer Koheles. And they say, does that include the toiling of Torah as well? Right? How can you say what advantage is there? Yeah. Hakol Hevel. So they say, Tachas Hashemesh, under the sun, en Yisron. There's no advantage. Aval lamala min Hashemesh yesh Yisron. Meaning that you can interact with the world which is not limited to the parameters of the world itself, but to that which the world really is from above. Okay? And then these actions that you're working hard at in the world, done in the right way, in the Amal HaTorah, which he says means finding everything's place in Torah and bringing it to its place in Torah, that changes the entire universe and its roots. Once we got on Koheles, I'll just tell you a fascinating story. There was one point that I taught Israelis. It was young men usually after the army. This was in Machon Lev. And the guys I had didn't have as much yeshiva background, and I was their first year of Beis Medrash over there. So I had one Talmud, and he was like always smiling. He always seemed so happy. So I wanted to get the secret, it's something you eat, whatever it is. If it's legal, I'll try it. I said, his name was Yanai. I said, Yanai, what's the deal? He said, I'll tell you my story. He said, I grew up in kind of high society in Rishon LeZion, I think he said it was. He said, I went to a very exclusive high school, and we were studying, part of the curriculum is Tanakh, right? But he said there's different kinds of Tanakh. Oh. There's Tanakh Chiloni, what they call Tanakh Dati. There's an entire non-religious Tanakh curriculum. Wow. So he said in 10th grade, we were studying Kohelet. And the teacher was talking, but meanwhile I started flipping through the Sefer because it was speaking to me, right? Everything that he said is nothing and meaningless. He's right. He said people spend all their time earning money, right? What happens to it? It's all Hevel, building the buildings. You're right. It's all nothing. Hakol Hevel. Everything's nothing. So he said, I flipped to see what is he building up to. And I saw in the last pasuk, the punchline, it said, Sof davar hakol nishma. Right? The end of all things is what's heard. Es Elokim yirah, fear Hashem, shmor mitzvosov, and keep his mitzvahs, ki zeh kol ha'adam. That is all of what an adam is about. Said, I didn't know what he was talking about, so I went over to the teacher and asked her, I said, what's this about? So she said, no, we're not even going to look at that last chapter. It's not authentic. Biblical criticism says that the rabbis wrote it later because they didn't like the beginning of the book, etc. He said, so there I was. I had the beginning of Koheles without the end. So I said, I call Hevel. I dropped out of school. And he said, and I was wandering around with this sense of meaninglessness. He said, I was musical. I played the saxophone. I tried to find meaning in that. I didn't. When I was 18, so when I went into the army, I tried to go into a top combat unit to feel meaning in that. And still I felt empty. And then in the army, one night I was sitting with some religious soldiers and I told them my thing and they said, no, that's really the punchline of the book. There is something that's not Hevel. And he said, you people can't understand what it's like to go from a world in which nothing matters, nothing lasts, nothing exists, to a world in which everything is significant. He says, that's why I always smile. Wow. He says, if you could feel it, you'd be smiling too. Wow. It opened my eyes very much to that. So this is the idea of what a person can do. And he says, what does it have to do with chukos HaTorah? So the word chukah, on one hand, refers to the laws with which we can't provide an explanation that'll satisfy critics, non-Jews, even Jews who are criticizing, why can't you wear shatnez? We have no scientific explanation for it. There are tamei mitzvahs. But in the end, and they call it zos chukas haTorah, because really every mitzvah, when you look into the details, the way the Torah does it, is not always something that everyone in the world will accept as how it should be done. Okay? There's always an aspect of chok in there. But word chok also means to engrave, to dig in. Right? Chakika, lachkok, means to dig in. He says, engraved in the Torah, and all that Hashem created is Torah. And that's your job, to find that, and to find that treasure, and to awaken it. Okay, now, a second. Let's just see one more place here in Emma. Sorry. Yeah, the beautiful image he brings in Emma and Tafresh Nun Vav. He explains it in the following way. He says that in the world, right, again, the Chochma Genuza b'Maisa Bereshis B'Koach HaTorah. He says you can only find that wisdom which is hidden in Maisa Bereshis with the Torah. Meaning it's not accessible to anyone who tries to access it anyway. You can access that Chochma Chitzonis, you can access the beauty of nature, but you can't find the Torah in there without the Torah. Right? That's the idea that the world was created for the Torah. And he says, by this amal, this toil in Torah, then you can actually find the true, beginning particle, so to speak, of all things that exist. And that's Torah. So he says, because ish Yisrael lahamin shakol Torah, a person has to believe that everything is Torah. And the power of the 10 utterances which Hashem made to create the universe, right? Those are also at the root of nature. So he says, Imros Hashem Torah's kesef tzorof. In Tillim it says that Hashem's utterances are like pure silver. Pirush, what does that mean? Kemoshe kesef nimtza tocha ofor. Says, think about our precious metals. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put precious metals in the world, which is interesting. Certain metals that are particularly beautiful. There's limited amounts of them in the world. And you have to do all sorts of things to find them. Whether it's for panning for gold in rivers in California or digging these deep, deep mines in Africa or whatever it is to get it. And even when you get it, you can't make jewelry out of it right away. You have to purify it. You have to smelt it. You have to heat it up. You have to remove the impurities. So he says, so too, the Torah is hidden like gold, like silver in the Bria. But that's why it says in Mishnah, Kamatmonim techapsenu. You have to seek it out like treasure. Person will say, what do you mean I got to seek it out? There's so much Torah here, I don't even know what to do with it. No, the Torah which is in the world. Okay? And he says that, in fact, is an idea of redemption, of Geula. And that's what Am Yisrael are going to be doing to the world, is to be able to redeem it in that way. So let's see how this applies to the day-to-day life of the Jew. So there's a piece of Sfas Emes in Bereshis, which I love, I've spoken about many times, but we'll tie it in here. It says the Torah begins with a beis, Bereshis. We all know that. Medrash says that the letter Aleph did a hafgana, right? It did a protest outside the Kisei HaKavod for thousands of years. And it was protesting. It says, I'm the first letter. Why did you start the Torah with the letter beis? Right? So he says, so the answer was, Hashem said, finally answered, before Matan Torah, tomorrow I'm going to give the Torah. And that starts with an Aleph. The 10 Dibros start with Anochi, with an Aleph. So we don't know why the Aleph is protesting, why the Aleph feels better with that Anochi. Still, when you open up the Chumash, you see a big beis, right? The Anochi is buried there in Parshas Yisro. So he explains like this. He says, the idea of the Aleph and the beis teaches us that it's true. What we see first is the world of nature. But we have to understand that that world is a beis. It's a second that comes from a first, which is an Aleph. The Torah, which is the reason for the world being created, is behind everything that we see. And therefore, he says, that's the idea, Bereshis, Bishvil HaTorah Shenikris Reshis. Don't think that this world is created just for this. It's created for something that came before it. And Bishvil HaTorah Shenikris Reshis. Very nice. But what does that have to do with a person? And he says, and why was the Torah so abstruse? Now, if you want to say Hashem created the world for the Torah, say he created the world for the Torah. Why do you have to call it Reshis, the first? He says, because those two things together, it's created for a Jew and it's created for the Torah. But for a Jew who views the Torah as Reshis. Meaning, before every encounter, every interaction with the world of nature, which we call the world of beis, every Jew is supposed to have an Aleph behind it. There's supposed to be a Torah reason why I'm doing the things I do, and that will guide me as how to do them. Nothing starts for us from the world of beis. It always starts from the world of Aleph. Bishvil Yisrael, he says, in order, Bishvil Zeh Atzmo, for this very avoda we do, Shenostin Hareshis El Torah, that we first look to the Torah and then do Bezemis Kaim Ha'olam. That is what keeps the world together. There's a fascinating, puzzling story they tell about the Chazon Ish. There was a young man, I knew his name, I forget, he became very well known, Bnei Brak, who was one of those who had the good fortune to be close to the Chazon Ish. And he had recently got married, and he was sitting in the Chazon Ish's little hut in Bnei Brak. And the Chazon Ish said, I want to ask you a question. I'm thinking about something, it's hard for me to decide. There are two sides to it. Sometimes I see a young man who's really, on fire when he's in yeshiva, right? Learning and doing mitzvahs and davening, all these things. And then after he gets married, you kind of see him coasting and sometimes going downhill. So I wonder, is it that he never really had it when he was in yeshiva in the first place? Or is it that, and therefore the yeshiva environment keeps it going, but when he has to deal with things outside, he can't maintain it? Or is it that he had it, but there's something about the challenges of going out there that somehow took it out of him? And the young man, being very sensitive, he thought the Chazon Ish was talking about him. He said, here I am, I'm recently married. The Chazon Ish is talking about a young man who was a great Ben Torah in yeshiva, and now after he gets married, he's going down. He started crying and he ran out of the house.
Yeah.
He didn't continue the discussion. So a friend saw him. He said he couldn't do anything. He was wandering the streets of Bnei Brak. A friend saw him. He said, what's really what? He's told him this. He says, why do you think the Chazon Ish was doing that? He says, go ask him what he meant. So he comes back into the Chazon Ish's house. Why you run away? He said, thought you were telling. He says, no, I wanted to talk it over with you, this example. And he says, I'll tell you what I think. He says, I think that in certain ways, the yeshiva student probably didn't have what it took to do that Avodas Hashem outside the walls of the yeshiva, because it has to be something which is built up throughout your lifetime. He said, I'll give you an example. A fellow in yeshiva, his shoes...
The boy thing?
This is the Chazon Ish telling the boy. He says, this is the way I think it goes. A young man in yeshiva, his shoes are falling apart. He wants to go to the shoe store, get some shoes. He says, when he goes out, he says, Rebbeinu Shalom, I need to buy shoes. Please help me buy shoes that are good for me. Help me find them at a good price. Help me find them without having to spend too much time, right? Let me get along with the one who's selling. Let it be a good, honest deal that we're both happy with. And then he goes and buys his shoes. He says that person, even when he has to transition, and it's a very sharp transition out of the world of being in the yeshiva 24/7 to being married and to having to earn your living and to have to deal with neighbors and apartments and rent and who knows what else. He says if you haven't done it then, the shock there oftentimes shakes the person off of his foundation and he can end up descending in many ways. So he said he thinks that that's what it is. It's not that the challenges out there are impossible for a person who's built himself the right way. He says, but we're not used to building ourselves that way. We just do. To us, the world of buying shoes is limited to the base. Store has shoes, I need shoes, I have money, he sells shoes, that's it. The person didn't bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu into that. And first, and also when you ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to succeed in this, that reminds you, I have to do this according to the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. Right? I must be honest in my dealings, I must do it in the right way. And that is how the person can grow. So this is what we see here. That's the idea of Amelim Batorah. The classic narrow yeshivish definition of Amelim Batorah is the effort, mind, heart, and soul to understand Torah. And that's certainly true. But he says the Amelim Batorah is referred to by Telechu, by walking in the world, is to discover that there's Torah in everything you encounter and everything you have to interact with. And only through the Torah can you bring that out and awaken it and bring the world to that sense of peace that's really built into it, that started with that fear that its existence is dependent on Torah. He said this is something Am Yisrael will do, and then the nations will all get their connection through Am Yisrael. That's also, the nations of the world have their purpose as well. They're not just there to annoy us. And Am Yisrael eventually, like we see in the Rosh Hashanah davening and everybody else, then all the nations will come together through us doing and preparing the world to be what it's supposed to be, then they'll be able to access it. Then they'll be able to interact with it. And then v'yitnu lecha kesem alecha.